All right there. So I'm going to go ahead and cover what I did on Tuesday night here at the Digital Nest workshop for Unity game development. So um, this project comes with a bunch of cool little models, and there's these three little models down here by the refinery. They're called pump jacks. And if you'll open up your level art and open up the oil field in the level art, you can double click on one of those pump jacks and it'll take you right down to one of those pump jacks. Now, if I get into play mode right now, well, nothing's happening here, but it turns out that something could be happening if somebody just applied an Animator Controller. And I appreciate the students I had at Madera High in 2016 and 2017. That was 2016 was the first bunch. They caught it, and then 2017, my last year there at Madera, we managed to turn this on. But with this first pump jack selected right here, it's missing a runtime Animator Controller. And if I click the little circle select menu here, I can see there is an Animator Controller called Pump Jack. And with that pump jack set up, I can now click the run button, and you'll see that that one pump jack is now pumping, doing its thing. So very quickly here, I don't know why it jumps position. That's an interesting thing. I don't know why it jumps position. I might be able to sort that out, but I'm going to set up the Animator controllers for the other pump jacks also, so that all three of the pump jacks have their Animator controllers set up. So all three of the pump jacks will be pumping oil. So now that's the first little bonus tidbit for today. There's a couple of other housekeeping items here. Some things I neglected and I should have taken care of a long time ago. Please select your tank. Got your tank selected in the hierarchy here. We never assigned our tank to the proper layer. Over here in the inspector for the tank object, there's this thing called layer, and we want to make sure that the tank is on the player's layer. So assign it to the player's layer. And if it says just change, no, this object only. We just want the tank, the parent object, none of its children, just the parent object, because the children will inherit from the parent anyway. But now the tank is on the player's layer. That was another piece of housekeeping we needed to take care of. And then I don't know whether or not we ever dragged our tank. I don't think we ever did. With our tank here, we never ever put our tank inside of the prefabs folder to turn it into a prefab. So I'd like you to please drag your tank and drop it into the prefabs folder and select original prefab. We're going to make our tank into an original prefab. Now our tank is a prefabricated object, and it's ready to have some other things added to it, to be used too. Later we're going to peel a bunch of these components off because we're also going to do some artwork. So getting the main camera set up is pretty easy. To get the camera to follow our tank, because right now when we get into play mode, we drive away and that camera is just sitting where it is and it doesn't follow the tank. So what we're going to do here is in the hierarchy, we're going to create, so make sure nothing's selected in the hierarchy, and we're going to create an empty. And we're going to name this empty camera rig, CAMERA rig. And then its positions, making it this way, it might put it at some weird position. Click the little three dots over here and reset the position. And on our camera rig, we're also going to set its rotation in X to 40 and its rotation in Y to 60. And those numbers might be kind of familiar if you remember the numbers that we put in for our main camera. Remember, we tilted our main camera to 40 and 60 degrees and set some position variables here. We're just going to set our camera rig to already have that rotation for us. And then we're going to drag. We're going to click on our camera and we're going to drag it and we're going to drop it and make it a child of the camera rig. And when we did that, it changed some of the numbers. For instance, for our main camera, rotation in X and Y got turned into 0. And we also want to set the X position to 0 and the Y position to 0. And that Z position is a crazy number. Let's just make it a nice clean negative 65. And with those position variables set for our main camera inside of the camera rig, which we positioned at 000 with the rotations of 40 and 60, we pretty much have the same view that we had before, this nice orthographic view down in our game field. Now, there's some interesting stuff that's available, and I'm going to post the video of the guys who did this presentation. But on the notes on this, they talk about something called a frustum. And the frustum shows us where the near clip plane is for a camera and where a far clip plane is for a camera. And by the way, this camera we're looking at right here, this is a perspective camera. It's a camera where things, they look smaller in the distance than they do up close, because as you go farther away, things tend to get smaller in distance in a perspective view. Those are noting the near clip plane and the far clip plane. Nothing that's closer to the camera than the near clip plane is going to show up in the camera. So if there's objects in that space, they're not going to show up in the camera. Nothing that is beyond the far clip plane is going to show up in the camera. These clipping planes just basically, they define an area where the camera will see stuff. With an orthographic camera, it also has a near clip plane and a far plane, but as you notice, it's not perspective. It's an orthographic view. Everything stays relatively the same size, whether it's near or far, but it still has these clipping planes. And this object is still called a frustum. So looking at the difference here between an orthographic camera and a perspective camera, we can see that, in a perspective camera, right down here, things kind of get smaller in the distance. See, the buildings are smaller. But in this orthographic view, everything has the same relative size. Nothing is getting smaller in the distance. They all look the same size. So a camera, the orthographic camera, has this component called size. If we select our camera over here, we'll see that we did set it to an orthographic, and we'll see this number here, size. If I move this slider, change that slider for the size, you can see the size change on this camera. I want to put that back at where I had it at 5. This size measures the distance from the center to the top of the screen. Okay? But there's also another number which is called the aspect. And the aspect is the distance from the center to the edge of the screen. And aspect is equal to size times aspect. And our aspect ratio here is 16 to 9. And some math that's going on right here. So what do we want our camera to do? Well, we want our camera to follow the tanks. We want it to rezoom. We want it to change the size, resize the orthographic view to fit the tanks on the screen. And so we're going to need to find, and now I'm back off of these notes right here because I know what I'm doing here. Select your camera rig up here at the top and go to your scripts folder. And in your scripts folder, there's a folder called camera. And in the camera folder, there is a script called camera control. Make sure you got your camera rig selected so you can see camera rig over here in the inspector tab. And then drag the camera control script and drop it onto the camera rig. So you just drop it anywhere in this open space, it will attach the script. And then I'm going to go ahead and double click the script to open it up. We're not going to be adding any code to it. We are going to turn just a little bit of code off. And again, if you really want to understand how and why this script works, I would recommend you watch the video that I'll post following my video. It shows the nuts and bolts of what we did. They do a good job. So there are these 4 public variables here, but over in Unity, I can only see 3 of them. If I select my camera rig, I see damp time, screen edge buffer, and min size. And that's because over here in Visual Studio, this other public variable called transform m targets, this one is hidden in the inspector, so I'm not able to see it. I want to comment that out. I'll do a forward slash asterisk and an asterisk forward slash, and that's going to turn this into a comment. So it gets ignored by the compiler, and now this public transform is going to be accessible. Click the Save button, and I'll go back to Unity, and I'll see now that on my camera rig, Unity's catching up with me here, my camera rig now has a new variable called targets. And it needs a target to look at, and the target it wants to look at is going to be the tank. So if you'll click and drag your tank and drop your tank as the target, it will get the tank's transform, and it will know what it is supposed to follow. It's going to follow that tank's transform. So now when I press the play button, and as I drive around, the camera's going to be following me everywhere I go. Everywhere I go, it's going to follow me. All right. That's the nuts and bolts of getting the camera rig to work. Now, if you want to understand all the ins and outs of how and why that camera rig does what it does, please watch the linked video that I'll provide you with here shortly. But that's the long and short of what we did for a good, well over half of the time Tuesday night. Then I'll make another video for the other thing we did. All right, but thank you for now for this one. I'm going to wrap this one up.